fit's an interesting word because over the last 2 years, influencers have been treated like any other channel, which is coming to a quick end as we get more analytics from the platforms and we start to understand how to work with them better. But I think it's most relevant because if we don't quickly shift to kind of bringing influencers into the fold of the brand almost as guest creative directors, we start to run the risk of wasting time and effort on something that consumers sort of get, right? Just here, try my product, take a picture and post it on your Instagram and use a hashtag, right? We're sort of ending that era and entering this time where influencers come in and actually maybe create content without direction from the brand or agency. So fit becomes very important, both personality and who the audience is.
One of the biggest changes in today's society is that a brand's message doesn't have to come from the brand anymore. And when you think about these influencers, they're not only, they're telling your brand story in a way that might be a little bit different than your brand, but it might be a little more connected to how your customers are actually using your product if you find the right ones. And today, when you think about influence, a lot of people talk about reach, but there are other variables that impact influence too, like expertise and also the overall relationship that you have with the customer. So in my opinion, the reason why fit is so important is because that expertise in that relationship with their fan base is such a big part of the influence that sometimes is not taken into consideration when it comes to about picking the wrong people.
I have a really great relationship with somebody named Nicole Ciotti, and about 2 years ago she reached out to me. She was less than 100,000 followers. We represent Turtle Bay, which you may remember from Forgetting Sarah Marshall, but she wanted to come out, and it was a little bit, to give you a kind of gauge, we get about 100 incoming inquiries for people who want to stay at Turtle Bay Resort every single month. So we have to be really selective. But she sent me past examples. She showed her trajectory for her growth, and I kind of saw something in her, and I thought that she was somebody who might explode in the next few years. So kind of took a bet on her, convinced my client to have her out for a 4-night stay. She returned incredible coverage for us, and since then we've had this really great relationship where I'll be like, hey, do you want to come to La Jolla? Do you want to go to New York? And she'll tell me, hey, that's not really a brand fit for me. Or, hey, yes, I would love that. That's totally in line for me. So I think we focus on working with influencers who aren't just trying to make a dime, who understand who their brand is. And having that open dialogue to be like, that's not a fit for me, that's gonna help a lot. And I think because she doesn't hawk herself out to every such brand, people trust her third-party endorsement, which is what we're all seeking for. When we work with influencers, we want to work with somebody who, we value that opinion. It's like that friend that's like, oh, I love this restaurant. You go to the restaurant, you hate it, you're never gonna trust their opinion. So you wanna work with somebody who has good taste and recommends brands that they like. So kind of got lost in there, but I think working with people who are honest about who they are and who their brand is going to help you find the right fit for both of you.
I think there's a big opportunity building on that as well. Kind of learning about who people are, understanding what their objectives are and what they've done in the past. Also, bringing them in on the front end of innovation. So, as an agency, right, we're all about thinking of those big ideas that then translate into, at some point down the line, some consumer adoption, awareness, all those great metrics. But we also are now piloting a program in our New York office where we're doing influencer focus groups. So we are all familiar with focus group testing and messaging and product and all those things. We're now creating special groups just of influencers. And these aren't necessarily folks that we're actively saying, yes, you're going to be a part of this campaign, we're going to work with you here, but we're bringing them in and introducing them to some big ideas, introducing them to new product and new innovation, seeing how they react, and then we're hand-picking the ones that are actually most interested in participating in that process and most excited about what they see and hear. We know that those folks are going to be not only thankful that they sort of were brought in the beginning, but also they're going to feel more invested in what we're doing and what our clients doing. And so we're going to get a lot more out of them, and they're going to want to kind of come back again and again for these different events for different brands. So I think it's a big opportunity to think of that influencer in a different way.
And if I can add to these already great comments, I would say that when I look at the brands that have some of the best influencer brand relationships, at the core of a lot of these relationships is trust. And trust often comes with great fit. It comes with personal relationships, but trust is so important because when you're collaborating, especially in a creative environment, when these influencers are tremendous creative storytellers, you need to have that trust because there's going to be difference of opinions. And in some ways, you do need to, you can provide them structure, but you also need to allow the influencer to kind of tell that story in an authentic way that resonates with his or her audience. And without that trust, I've seen a lot of fighting, a lot of disagreements, a lot of issues associated with this content that's being produced.
Kyle, can you give us an example of a brand that's got a great trust with influencers?
Ooh.
Or anybody?
Yeah, there's a few that I don't want to promote because they're clients of ours, but I would say that when you look at the usage of influencer marketing today, one of the things I've noticed is that there's different tiers of influencers. So based on what tier you're talking about, different brands I would recommend. Personally, I think Charlotte Russe does a really interesting job with their influencers, having a very interesting tiered approach, where you have what are called the tier ones, which are like, think of it as a really massive following people. The tier twos, which are more like the micro influencers, maybe it's exchanging of gifts or something. And tier threes, which are everyday people that are posting about the brand, but might be up and coming fashion bloggers, etc. And I think they have a very interesting mix of a blend of the tier one, tier two, and tier three mixes, which also keeps your budget under control as well.
Let's get really tactical with that and talk about how are we putting these deals together?
Yeah, it's been tricky, I think, to jump into the analytics question, which is really maybe what you're asking, like how do we kind of get in there and understand, right, truly not only what's happening behind the scenes. Yeah, I mean, we do ask for now Instagram analytics as an example. So we have to have access to that. If you're at a certain tier, right, we want to see exactly who's in there. What we're finding from a pattern perspective is a lot of these influencers that are, we would consider like our top tier folks that are 250,000, 500,000 plus followers with high levels of engagement. They have great global followings, which don't necessarily apply to our US-based clients. Like Pepsi's a client of ours, they love the global influencers, right? But we kind of have a running joke about, you got a Pepsi budget or not, right? Do you care about lift as your core metric, global lift, global brand lift? Or are you really concerned with sales that we have this month? Right. So we have to sort of get in and understand that before we bring those recommendations to our clients. So we look at that. We also look at overall engagement rate and depth, how that's happening. Like, are we just seeing a bunch of comments like for like stuff and things like that? Not so valuable. We also look at content overall, creative direction, and are we family friendly or not? Those types of things. And regional impact as well. That's a big one for us because you buy every other type of media based on some sort of regional criteria. We can't necessarily just go buy influencers or work with them or build long-term relationships with them if they don't fit the region that our client's looking to really target.
So you actually have regional influencers and manage them on a regional level.
Yep, absolutely.
So we just onboarded a new tool called Hyper. It's HYPR. Have no vested interest in this, but they actually can tell you what the demographics of your influencers are. So how old are the followings, where are they located, what's the engagement rate on a scale of 1 to 10. So that's really helped in the vetting process when speaking with clients. It's like, is this audience really going to be able to afford a $1,000 stay at a Peninsula hotel? And are they living in our key markets, which are New York, Chicago, Los Angeles? And now we're able to kind of PDF out some information about this influencer and say, hey, here's why. It has a search query, so you can set, like, let's say you're looking for a micro influencer between 50 and 100,000 that lives in Denver, Colorado, and their demo likes to talk about activities outside. You can get really micro with it, and I think that's really helped sell in some of our influencer programs because the number one question I get from the client side is this really going to move the needle? Is their influence, or is their audience our audience? And that's really helped vet that.
Can I start an argument?
I'm so glad you mentioned, this idea of an influencer talking about a brand before there was any formal relationship. I think, authenticity is a word that really gets thrown around a lot, pretty much in every brand meeting that any of us have had lately. That's been usually said more often than not. And I think it's one of those words that can easily be shaped to fit your sort of purpose, right? If you want to paint a picture as something being authentic, it's pretty easy to kind of put that together. And I think this is a really interesting definition, right? To say, well, who's talking about this brand before there was any relationship on the table? That is, I think we would maybe universally accept that that's a truly authentic situation.
I kind of have a bone to pick with tools in general when it comes to influencers. They come and go all the time, and now there are agencies that just focus on influencers and those types of things. I think the human aspect of really building criteria and doing the legwork before you're taking these ideas to your client is super important, because the platforms themselves don't like tools. Some of them work with them, some of them don't. Every vendor that I've ever had come to us says, we have great relationships, we have API visibility, we have everything we need to dig into the data. It's just not true. Instagram doesn't give away its data, and it doesn't let people, third-party companies, actually view its data. You guys should know that, because if you want to really understand, the good thing is now we can get that directly from the platform. There's no elegant way to do this. It always has paid us back many times over to actually go in and do the digging. It's time intensive, but well worth it. So I'm sure you guys do that too. But
yeah, I think it's sort of a mix of analytics, and I think Josh was mentioning that too. It's kind of a holistic view. You can't just be like, oh, the demos match, but what if their content is awful and ugly and doesn't work with us, and they're not a good partner? So I think you start with those conversations, but in order for, I have tough clients, so I have to sell it in not only like, I really like this person, I think they're going to do a great job. Here are some past case study examples. In addition, here are some recent metrics and their engagement rate. So, sometimes you'll have I'm talking to a head of marketing, and all they care about is the bottom line and numbers. So I think from an agency side, it's kind of imperative that we come to the table with some metrics, but I for sure see your side.
Yeah, and you can make your own, right? So that's the other thing too, is that there is no accepted standard, so you can create some criteria and start to develop out that data set over time, and then you can identify patterns and a lot of things like that from campaign to campaign. So great opportunity there.
Yeah, I know I have some questions, but go for it.
Yeah, I think to sum that all up, you have to keep in mind that tools were created to help us, not run us. And if you systemize the process, you can always humanize the exception. So not to put all your eggs in one bucket, to use them in harmony and really as a boost to show your clients, like, I'm not just bullshitting you. Like, there is numbers behind this, but I also feel that this would be the best influencer for your brand.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Zach, you have a question?
Yeah, I'm Zach Kaufman, One World Studios. Yeah, I was sort of thinking, I was going to speak to something that Marissa said, and then you guys got into the analytics, and there's kind of like sort of a connection. We were an influencer, and still are, but then we actually became more of a broadcaster network, so we started getting our own influencers. So now we have about 15 hosts globally who host live shows for us and then broadcast directly to our network. And how we found them is kind of what you were talking about, is we bring them out of the community, people either that already have a cachet and people we know, people love them because we're monitoring the community, so they become, they're authentic voices within the community. But then, speaking to the analytics issue, once they do a couple of shows, you don't need to start them on the biggest stage. You start them on a controlled, smaller stage, and then you can create your own metrics. And you can see, how did they do? And if they didn't do that well, thank you. You don't invite them back. And if they do great,
right? So you
green light
have a little
it. Yeah.
structure and process that's
It's like
wrapped
mini
around it,
pilot.
and that's a little bit of it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in terms of, I work with hotels, and at the risk of mentioning another tool, we use Newbie, which is a listening tool, and yeah, see some head nods over here. But basically, we were able to see when certain people were coming to the hotel and had above average following or influencer score. So we ignited what was called a surprise and delight campaign, where we would send them a specialized amenity. So I'd send my team over to stalk the heck out of their Instagram page and discover that they love, chocolate chip cookies and mochas or something. And so we go ahead and sometimes we could even get, a framed photo of their dog or something. And we were able to send up these specialized amenities, and a lot of times that opened the door for us to be like, oh, and we'd love to invite you for an F&B experience. And the next time we'd love to do a hosted experience pending the fact that we saw some sort of uptick in followings or perhaps web traffic. So.
Nice.
The good news, I think, is that things are moving so quickly right now that as an agency, I always have something to talk to my clients about. And I think the bad news is that no one can keep up, right? So Facebook releases 5 new products every month, right? And those products range from new ad units to new ways that the newsfeed operates. They don't tell anybody that they're going to do that. They certainly don't sort of let any third-party tools or software know ahead of time, unless it presents like a major functionality change to something that is really bringing revenue and users into Facebook itself. So like the tools that sell to agencies as a primary customer base they're not the last to know, but they're not learning any sooner than the agencies are what's going on. So you do run the risk of burning the client. And this has happened to us before with a global brand where we actually just had broken analytics on a key component of a campaign for like 3 months before the tool actually updated and would let us know that happened. That's out of the norm for sure, but that's the issue. I feel like if we had at that time a better pulse of what's actually going on inside that network, we would have been able to get ahead of it, or at least have some backup data to prove out what was going on, and this is not, it's not isolated to tools that we all use as agencies to monitor and track this stuff. This has been like a long issue with Google and with traditional digital media, where we're reconciling constantly, like, well, we paid for this many clicks and we're only seeing this much, this is how much traffic ended up on our client's site. There's a different 10 to 20%, right? Pretty standard.
Yeah.
So one thing that I think technology, perhaps some tools could be very helpful with, is identifying influencers that are not made so obvious to your brand. That might be in the mid-tier, tier 2s, or perhaps people that you might not think are as, quote, on brand. A good example of this happens in the outdoor industry, right? Where a lot of the people there that run the marketing departments are incredible ski enthusiasts. And they go out and they find other snowboarders and skiers who are really good at their jobs and take great Instagram photos, etc. But the problem is a lot of these ski resorts, their audience isn't actually that small niche, pro skier demographic. It's everyday people like me who make up a lot of their business. And quite frankly, I can't relate to the stories told by these, really impressive, great skiers. However, I do relate to other people like me, perhaps my friend group, perhaps other people that are in business, and I can relate to them going to the mountain, and what they get out of that experience is actually much different than the person that's going to ski the double black diamond. What they're talking about is it's a great family trip. It's a great social opportunity to engage with clients or to connect with teammates. So my whole point on that is that sometimes brands get so caught up about finding a fit that is so directly related to on brand, but sometimes there are these influencers in these other tangential areas that are actually very beneficial for helping you attract a different market, but more importantly, making your brand more accessible to a different demographic.
Excellent kind of point of identifying who owns your audience, right? And this requires, especially if you're on the brand side, as a marketer, you have to just get out of, kind of take yourself out of what you know and think about your target and what they're actually consuming in their newsfeed on a day-to-day basis. We like to come up with 3 categories. And so, for example, a CPG brand that's focused on women aged 25 to 40, every CPG brand that there is right now, but We would look at fashion, food, and fitness as kind of three key topics that we know are going to receive a lot of attention in the newsfeed. And then we'll go look at influencers in those categories. And that may not apply to a fragrance brand directly. And they're going to tell us that. Usually they're going to say, well, I don't understand how working with someone who's deep in the food type of influence category matters for us. Or I don't understand what a personal trainer that happens to have a lot of followers is going to do for our brand. So we have to really kind of work with them to help understand that that's just who will own the newsfeed on behalf of your brand, and kind of bring them in, and they can be big or they can be kind of micro influencers as well.
I think from a really tactical level, I guess we start with a goal. So what's a goal? And I guess I'll use a case study. The Beverly Hilton did a pool refresh. So basically redid their pool. They wanted local drive market, F&B. So we started with the goal. Then we did some research. We identified different verticals that those influencers might be in. So fashion, F&B, local Los Angeles influencers. Then we vetted those, created a list, passed that on to our client, got approval to go out for a certain amount of these influencers, and talked about what we could give them. Could we give them stays or hosted F&B? Could we give them a cabana? All of that good stuff. And then we basically went out to the influencers, got yeses and nos, created contracts, outlined FTC guidelines, so they have to do hashtag ad, hashtag sponsors, and things similar. Got into the negotiation, created contracts were signed, then worked with the local person at the property to devise their stays. And then we go through watching, kind of monitoring all the coverage come through. If we needed them to adjust any sort of messaging, we would be texting them, hey, that's the wrong geotag. And then we follow up with a kind of in-depth report for our client, and then monitor any sort of like spikes following that. So that's our particular process, and that's helpful to know.
Yeah, these are really great insights. Especially love this idea that looking for topics or areas of influence that may not be obvious to the brand, as you pointed out, Nick. And so I'll give you an example. We're working with a new performance apparel brand. And they're well funded, but they certainly don't have the opportunity to go head to head with the global giants who dominate all of the professional athlete endorsement relationships out there, right? And so the task becomes to work with them to find other areas that they can play in, where they can build relationships with people who may have significant influence that is still relevant to the purchase of performance apparel, but isn't specifically like, this guy is the number one basketball player in the world, and so we're going to pay him to endorse our product, right? And then that for a variety of reasons, whether it's budgetary or just the fact that you're coming to the table late, when a lot of those slots may be taken, right? I think we now find, if we're looking at influencers for a brand, we're going to find that a lot of the influencers we might want to work with are already in business with competitors. So you have the option of, let's go down the list of people that are maybe less important or influential, or let's look at other ways that they might be influential that's still relevant to the brand.
Well, if I can quickly add to that, I think one of the things that as a marketer you have to realize today is when it comes to your specific subcategory, there are a lot of times in which your message and your marketing tactics aren't actually very differentiated from the competitors, whether you're in the QSR vertical, performance sports, in the ski resorts as an example. And I think having these influencers tell your story in a differentiated way, that's where I think a lot of the value is, because if you spent 10 years in different shoe brands, going shoe brand to shoe brand, you know what works and what traditionally has been told. Well, the problem is today, as a consumer, there's just so much noise out there. And, as a millennial who's like every brand's ideal target demographic right now, like I get to be targeted by everyone to buy everything all the time. And sometimes these stories are not differentiated. And back to your comment about the has a person actually mentioned Clorox before? well, your customers, I believe, can tell your story in a unique, differentiated way that perhaps you did not think about in a room in front of a whiteboard, because they're living it on a day-to-day basis. They understand that why behind the what. So it's so much better than sometimes you do.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. I mean, this influencer lived it, and we got very lucky in that it's a perfect storm of not only did she live it every day, but she is a very well-known Latina celebrity. So being able to combine those two, and really it was a simple thing like, let's go out there and use one of these tools, I don't remember the name of it, and search who's hashtagging our brands. And that's where it started, so you're absolutely right.
So I want to go back to something Marissa said, even though we're all mad at you for The Apprentice now. But I love what you said about the idea of how do the two parties help each other, right? And again, I started the discussion with, this is not a typical media buy in the way that you have eyeballs and you want to pay for, right? But that there are real people behind the numbers, and that brands can help them build their own brands. And so I want to talk a little bit about to what extent there's an opportunity for in-kind, unpaid, sometimes, very sort of organic relationships. I started my career where we would send stuff to tastemakers. At that time, we didn't call them influencers, but we called them tastemakers. And we would just send them stuff for free, and hopefully they would do something with it. And we would call them and encourage them to, share with their fan bases. Very much, similar to what's happening today. Although, today there's a much more direct monetary relationship in most cases. But we may not all work for large global brands and have the budgets or the opportunities to do that. And so, let's maybe talk about the opportunity for those more organic relationships.
One of the ways that we recently got some significant influence participating in a campaign actually for free with no exchange of product involved at all was to create what we called a local ambassador program, right? And so we did have a campaign, and bear in mind, I don't think this works well for every brand. This particular client is the Field Museum in Chicago. Obviously a very well-respected global research institution and a nonprofit. So
Yeah.
that helps, right?
Sure.
So for the right client. But we did have an experiential campaign happening in Chicago, 10 iconic Chicago locations. If you know about the city, you know that most neighborhoods in Chicago are very different in terms of character and makeup. So we did actually kind of offer up to an appropriate influencer the kind of ambassadorship for ownership of that segment of the campaign.
It's great.
And in doing so, made them not only feel special, but kind of brought them almost the responsibility of bringing forth a very positive message to the local community. So I think, for the right, the right opportunity, there are definitely ways to do that. Maybe thinking about how a brand, if you're not so altruistic in your messaging, you do have product to sell. You may look at ways to build in a charitable or feel-good component to a campaign that helps you engage those folks in a more meaningful way.
Yeah, absolutely. Play on the emotion for sure.
So I think for me, one analogy I always give is think about how your organization treats journalists today, right? And think of these influencers as also people with incredible followings of a media company. And reality is, when you just approach a journalist at first, this day, I want to write about me tonight, typically that relationship doesn't work as well. But when you kind of get them involved, provide them with tips, help them out, pat their back a little bit here and there, oftentimes it comes to a much better relationship over time. And when I think about these influencers, right, and I think there was a great comment earlier about, hey, they're not just here for your reach. They're actually a lot probably cheaper and more efficient ways just to get that reach. The reality is these people are also ideal customers of yours as well. And for some brands, I've seen them actually reach out to these influencers for feedback on future marketing tactics, future product releases, etc. And as a result, it makes them feel a lot more connected to the brand. Because when you think about these influencers, they're also people, right? They want to show that they've done different things, and they have diverse skill sets. I don't think they want to be seen as just Instagram followers and likes and engagements, right? They want to be seen as intelligent human beings and great storytellers and people who can really resonate with a particular audience. So the brands that I've seen that, especially these up and coming brands, they've done a great job of inviting them over, understanding the product development process, understanding the story behind why the brand exists, and also giving their feedback. Those brands, I believe, do the best job of engaging organic relationships with these customers, with these influencers.
Yeah, I'll give you a real world example of that. For many years, we managed Mazda's social media, and when we first started, we reached out to these fan pages. There were a number of Facebook fan pages and particularly forums, message boards devoted to Mazda racing, tuning up their Mazdas, all of these interests that were run by people who were doing it for free on the weekends. They were using without permission our clients' trademarks and product images and all of that. And so we reached out to them to introduce themselves. Most of them thought we were calling to tell them to shut their pages down. And in fact, when we told them that we wanted to celebrate the love that they're showing Mazda and their enthusiasm for this brand, and we wanted to help them grow their followings and give them access and assets and news and things like that they could work with to make their own sites better and to fuel their communities. They were overjoyed, and we worked with these people, sometimes for multiple years. It was never a conversation about money. It just wasn't something that was important to them. They were doing it for the love, and we found that the more we could just show them the love, and in some cases, allow them to meet people from the company that they were, so devoted to, that was a huge thing for them. In some cases, getting them into events or giving them access to things that they just weren't able to do on their own. Those were huge benefits and became essentially a distribution network for the stories that we wanted to tell.
Yeah, I also think, this isn't my campaign, but ClassPass did a really great job with their ambassador program. My friend is Sweat and Repeat LA, and if you've been in a workout class, you've probably seen her. But when she was first starting her page, she was just a ClassPass member, one of the first people to really start doing that. And they reached out and were like, hey, do you want to be an ambassador? There was no exchange of goods at first. And she was just honored because she was at an early part of her career. And so it was just great to be associated with a brand like ClassPass. Sort of creating that formal partnership with them increased her clout. So it actually helped her get to that next level. So I think if you're a brand that has any sort of following, if the influencer is at a smaller level or kind of more of a micro influencer, they might see value in just associating their name with your ambassador program. And then over the years, she's gotten exclusive events, invites, and now brands see her in association with ClassPass, and she literally has a closet full of free things that people send her. So I think if you can kind of sell it in as, well, hey, we don't have a monetary exchange for you, but this could help build your brand in this kind of symbiotic, that can be a really great way to approach an organic influencer who's already interested in your brand.
Yeah, that's huge, especially when we talk about kind of micro-influencers, people that are on their way up. They're not getting huge checks thrown at them. If you think about it, they're in really competitive industries themselves, right? They're scrapping for every follower, every bit of engagement that they get, right? And so the more the brands can be friendly to that, and in a lot of cases just help validate that. If you think about a brand that gives someone their first ever brand deal, regardless of if there's no money attached or whatever, you all of a sudden put this person on the map that they can then go shop that to actually start getting money, and you can make a pretty big difference in someone's trajectory by taking that approach. Yeah?
I have a question for you guys about where you think the future of influencer marketing will be in like 5 or 10 years. You had a great example, Kyle, of talking about behavioral targeting and how now every brand and their brother is trying to get to you and whatnot. Whereas 8 or 10 years ago, that was pretty revolutionary stuff. As we see more brands going into influencer marketing, and maybe that degrades some of the authenticity that we seek, Where do you see it going? What do you see as a natural evolution of actual effective marketing in that strategy?
I think you got about 2 more years. That's about it. Facebook is a great example of this. The things we've seen over the last 1.5 years in terms of organic reach have fundamentally changed the way, like how many people here recruit Facebook influencers as the #1 criteria? I mean, no one, right?
We do, but
Um,
we have a huge network already on Facebook.
you guys are already an influencer,
Yeah.
right? And so you're actually a publication.
And then we grow that.
So I think that's a little different than most brands that have a product to sell. They know because when they post something on Facebook, it reaches now under 1% of their available audience. They're not coming to us saying, boy, we'd really like to pay a bunch of money to use some Facebook influencers. I think one of the key things that's now happening with Instagram, and we've seen this because we actually do own some publications, and so we get to see that side of the business too, is Facebook is now ratcheting down Instagram reach. And so that's should be troubling to anybody that relies on Instagram as a key influencer channel, because what it means is pretty soon, because Facebook, they gotta make that money. The stock price has to keep going up, they're publicly traded, and to keep revenue up, we know they have to build more ad inventory and sell that ad inventory. They're not gonna be able to do that with current levels of organic reach within the platform. Probably some others will go down that route too. Snapchat has been, if you're an agency, you've been getting hit up pretty hard by them for some very, very expensive ad products. Those prices are going to come down and inventory is going to come up. And so, kind of that, looking at that trend. I'm not saying influencer marketing is going to go away. I'm just saying it's going to be fundamentally different and probably not this, very nice relationship building thing that we have today. But 2 years.
Well, one of the keywords that came up as we were trading notes before the panel was nimble, and I think that's certainly a watchword. So it's almost time for lunch, but give the rest of you would give us your prophecy of the next 5 to 10 years. What's it going to be?
I guess, nimble, there's always going to be emerging platforms and people are going to become early adopters where there's 100% reach. So if you're an influencer, be open to starting on Snapchat or whatever the next platform might be. In terms of our strategy, I think it's stepping away from the one and done, creating ongoing, long-standing relationships with people. And I think transparency is going to be huge. We just saw it with Airbnb. They were, with the Kardashians, basically were asked to change their copy to say like a gift from Airbnb. So the FTC is stepping up their game, and I think it's going to be a lot more apparent to consumers when we are offering things for trade or exchange moving forward. And what that means for us is going to change if our clients are still going to be interested.
I think you have to look very closely at what's going on with Facebook Live, Snapchat Stories, Instagram Stories, etc. And what I mean by that is less about the liveliness and timeliness of it, which is definitely a big part of it, but it's also how is storytelling going to be evolving over time. And you see this interesting shift when it comes to what I think is so interesting about Live and other platforms similar is that there's kind of this decreased expectation when it comes to production value associated with some content. And as that expectation for that content value decreases, all of a sudden what's going to happen is that it's less about the production value and more about your ability to tell a story. And in those types of environments, I think that the people who are more natural at that are going to excel.
Marissa, would you predict the future for us?
I don't know that I'm going to predict the future. And I guess I'm going to throw this out there like in the middle. Transparency or even regulatory, right? I heard you mention, and I agree with you, this is how we approached it. Influencers approaching them the same way if you had a PR background, the way you'd approach a journalist. And that's scary because they're not. But they've become that to generations of people. And so how will that be managed? Who will manage that? And how will there be positive and negative impact on our brand relationships with people who certainly are not journalists, they're thought and opinion leaders, and we don't really control what they say or how they say it. And we don't know if there's any fact-based in what they say and how they say. And when that line is crossed, it's a little scary. So I don't know if this is right or wrong, and maybe I am kind of throwing that, but I do think transparency, but regulatory, who's gonna come in and really fact check and get this in check? So that's my question, maybe more for anyone.
Well, that's great. Anyone that's interested in the regulatory environment, pay attention to the Blake Shelton versus In Touch magazine case. He's suing them for defamation, and one of the, I'm not a lawyer, but I'll give you my fake legal advice. So one of the definitions of defamation is that you have to have damaged the person's reputation. And so one of the issues in the case is that Blake Shelton's reach is 3 times that of In Touch magazine. So they've got a really strong case to just say, well, he's more important than we are, so we're not actually hurting him. Now, I'm not going to predict how that case is going to play out, but I think these are issues that are going to impact essentially all of us in the room. As you mentioned, transparency becomes much more important. So I think we're about out of time. I imagine there may be more questions to this. I'd like to ask each of our panelists to just give us, how do we reach you online? If we have questions, is there something in particular that you want to hear from the group if they want to come to the questions afterwards?
We were left out of the program, so you can follow me on Twitter at Jen_Wonders.
Twitter, K147, or email Kyle@pixelteam.com.
I'd love to say use Twitter, but I do use it, but don't reach me there. Nick, Nick, @noticeagency.com. Or just talk to me.
Marissa.nance@omd.com.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.